Hey tubers, welcome back for another adventure. So let's get started on this Bayou. As I mentioned before, it is 87. Let's call it an 87 Bayou. I think that's a pretty safe number. And one of the first things I always like to do, I want to make sure the engine is capable of running. Easy enough to do. You either take off the recoil starter, or if you got a recoil starter, you gently give it a couple of pulls. Make sure the engine goes around without any clangs, bangs, or anything else. By turning it by hand, as I'm doing now, you could also feel, things, how they are. I mean, it appears to have compression. It's making its huff and puff sounds. So, I mean, very good signs, right? Typically, the crank bolt is 14 millimeters. On the China stuff, you take off the little access plug, and you could do it on this one. You take off the recoil starter. This engine appears to be fine from a clang and bang point of view. You could also, if you kind of give it a if the rod is really loose, you can kind of hear a little clicky or whatever. But once again, this engine seems fine. We'll be turning it over in no time. Given that the engine is not seized, the next thing I like to do is to try to put some power to the starter and see if we can't turn it over. So here's the starter right here. And there's the lug you put power to. I got one battery terminal clamped to the frame. And let's so my starter's out too. I did a little research about a recoil starter for these things, and given that they were only built for a couple of years, I did not have any luck finding one. I don't know if they used the same recoil starter as the Lakota, and I gotta look into that. When it comes to troubleshooting an all-terrain vehicle, the ignition system and so forth, an electric starter makes life just so much easier. Right? My next move would have been pulling the spark plug. You do a quick compression test on it, right? Assuming it's got compression, you're ready to go forward. With it in its current state, life is not nearly that easy. Looks like this cover comes off without too much trouble. I mean, assuming the bolt and the baskets come off without too much issue. So I guess the next thing I could do, or the next thing I'm going to have to do, is you need some way to start it. This could be rope started, but it's kind of hard to check the spark as you're pulling the rope and, trying to look at that at the same time, look at the spark plug at the same time. I guess I can turn it over with a drill and make sure I could get spark to this thing. Maybe I'll try that before I take any nuts and bolts out. By the way, this thing is slowly drifting toward becoming a parts bike. If once again, this is the same jug, and if it's any good, if it's the same jug as a Lakota, if the piston and jug are any good, that kind of makes it valuable. It is a 300 like the Lakota, and I'm sure one of you will tell me. It's interesting when I first, I always like to kind of do an intro on these things, because a lot of times people will send me little notes and tell me things like this is to lock and unlock the differential. Supposedly with this thing unlocked, the tires get power independently. So I did not know that. That was a good thing to be told. Somebody else also mentioned that they've had troubles with the recoil starter and a starting relay. So before I get too in the weeds with the whole thing, I want to make sure the starting relay isn't somehow shorting my battery to the frame, such that once again that lug goes to the starting relay, shorting the starting relay to the frame. So as I'm trying to tickle the starter to get it started, it won't do anything. I guess I could pull that lug off the starter and figure it out that way. Yeah, when you're working on these things, there's a little bit of mystery and intrigue. So, and I guess we're finding that now. So let me show you guys where I get all my knowledge from. This is an eBay listing for the stator and pickup coil for an 86 and an 87, which is what I think this thing is. So first of all, let's take a quick look at the stator. If you look at it closely, all the coils are exactly the same size. You don't have that ever famous red wire or black and red wire or AC coil, a coil to power the stator. So given what I'm looking at here, I'm saying first of all, this is a DC powered ignition system. The capacitive discharge box, the CDI on this thing, is powered by DC power. It's powered by the battery. And what does that mean to you? That means for this thing to start, assuming the engine's okay, your starter is good and all that other junk, your battery needs to be good and your wiring needs to be good, such that when you turn the switch on and all, your CDI is powered. You have to make sure you have 12 volts at your CDI. So that's one thing we've learned for that. We've looked over the wires, and as is typical, you have 3 yellow wires coming from here, and that is basically your alternator, your 3-phase alternator, which goes to your voltage regulator, goes to your battery, obviously with some interruptions, perhaps of switches and other such trivia. But basically, that's the first thing I noted. The second thing I noted was these 2 little wires in the connector that goes to the pulse generator. Kind of important to find. So having unplugged them here, here's my 3 yellow wires, so I know that's power. And here are the wires that go to the pulse generator. We have a blue one, solid blue, and black. I'm going to use the solid blue as the hot end of the pulse generator, the positive end, the part that goes into the CDI as CDI input, and I'm going to use the black end of this as the ground. It's going to go where ground goes. On some of these, I've done that, and you get a little bit of a kickback, or it'll start but it doesn't run very good. And I've turned the wires around such that, you know, now the black would be the input to the CDI and the blue would be the one going to ground. And on some of these, it seems to make them start and run better. I'm also noticing here that this has some Black Death around the starter case. That's normally not a good sign. So the first thing I did was check my meter for continuity, and you guys could see what I'm doing is testing the pulse generator. And I am at the highest ohmage value, and I am getting an open circuit. So the second thing I did was I took these wires off and I shorted them together, so to speak. And once again, just to verify that my meter is working and I get a short circuit. So this thing died of an open pulse generator. why is it opened? I mean, these wires, particularly as they go through here, they feel as if they have a broken spine, so to speak. So even though I really am trying to avoid tearing this engine apart, I'm at a crossroads. I'm either done, or I gotta take this bolt out, take this apart, get this cover off, and see what's going on in here. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go on hold, and let me tell you why. First of all, we're supposed to get snow for tomorrow, and I have other things I should really be spending some of my time on. So I want to do that. So that's item number one. Item number two, I really don't want to tear this thing apart and let it sit around in a torn apart state. In its current state, I could tape up the carburetor to keep bugs out of it and snow and everything else, and I could put that cover on it, and it'll be relatively secure until I get back to it. But I'm sure some of you normally if one of these has an open stator, I'm sure there's another one out there with an open stator, or not open stator, an open pulse generator. So let's go through how I would continue to troubleshoot this. Once again, given that this wire doesn't feel like it has any strength anymore, it's kind of a guess of mine that it could just be a broken wire. What I would do is 8 millimeters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's like 10 of them. I'd get those out. I'd get this 14 millimeter out. I'd slide those two off. I'd slide the cover off. You got to tilt it up, because if you don't tilt it up, the oil will fall out of it. Chances are you're also going to have to get the shifter off. I'm lucky in this case, this shifter does not appear to be welded. No, it feels like it's intact. Once you take that off, then you kind of get as close as you can to the pulse generator and check it again. Obviously, you can buy an entire stator pulse generator for $68. You could probably get the pulse generator cheaper. There's probably a clone out there. Typically, they go somewhere $20-30, right? You unbolt it, you bolt it back in, you run the wire out. No big deal. You hook it all up, and you should be running again. So it's that simple. This bike has a few complications that are slowing me down, makes me not love it. First of all, it's very heavy. So that's strike one. Strike two, the starter's no good. Strike three, it needs a recoil starter. And strike four, somebody nailed the VIN on me. So to get this running, what's it worth? It just doesn't have a lot of value to me, especially as a long cart. I have other stuff I can get rolling. So I think this thing is going back into storage. I'm not going to call it dead. Let's not call it dead. Hold a minute on that. But it's going into cryogenic suspended animation until I decide what I want to do with it. So for me, at the moment, it does not pay to put any more time and effort into it. For some of you, I'm sure you would be like, no, let's get it running. Let's put whatever money it takes into it to make it right. The electrical part, no big deal. I'm sure I can figure that out. I might even get lucky if I put the pulse generator in. Believe it or not, the spark might come right back, and it might be able to fire up. I've done some research on a recoil starter, and they don't appear to be out there and plentiful. And I'm going to start looking for it, so to speak. I'm going to start regularly doing eBay scans, and if I find one for $50 or less, 60, I would probably buy it. I'd put it on there, and now I'm beginning to develop an interest in this bike again. I could do without the electric starter, but you know, homie ain't wrapping a rope around there and having that ankle biter get a hold of my leg and cause me to get wounded. So you know, even if I do get it started, what's the use of getting it started if I can't get my hot little hands on a recoil? If I were to own this thing, and let's say I decide to pop for an electric starter, which by the way is, they're somewhere around $100. I don't know if this one's got a special also on that. I didn't do that research yet, but you can see very quickly how the numbers are adding up. 25 or so for the pulse generator, 50, 100 if I can find a recoil starter for it, or an electric starter, 100 give or take. You know, if I were to put a recoil on it, or if I were to put an electric starter on it because I couldn't find a recoil, I would get this outer basket, this Briggs & Stratton basket, off of here, and I set up some kind of cover that I can bolt on that. One can't get rid of this outer gear, because if you do, you'll be leaking oil. There is a seal there. One of you guys asked a question, and let me answer it here on this video. They said, I'm not sure of which bike they had, but their coils and flywheel and all are outside the oil path. In this case, they are in the oil path, but in his case, his were outside. But he was having a leak. Chances are the flywheel presses up against the case, or this guy presses up against the case. And, well, it has to be the flywheel, right? You have to have the flywheel on the outside. Anyway, your seal is probably bad there, and you're leaking oil. I have not had it yet, but people have mentioned it, where they'll have a bent crank, which is why the seal is no good. I haven't seen it. I mean, the power transmission isn't through this little end of the crank here. It's out on the other side, so I haven't seen that. But people have mentioned it. I'm not quite sure how they would do it, unless it was some maintenance gone wrong. Somebody did something while they were trying to get the flywheel off, or something like that. Anyhow, I'm sorry this is not running. Harvey failed. Boy, this is... Well, I haven't failed. I just kind of backed off. There's one bike I've failed on so far, and it's sitting in the lower driveway. The one that I got from Andrew. That thing has started for me twice on starting fluid. Once it started without even the CDI box. It was sitting there. I hooked a jump pack to it, and I gave it a hoot of starting fluid, and it started on the starting fluid, and I wasn't able to duplicate that for a second time. And then the other time I actually caught it on camera, and you guys saw it. I took the carburetor off, I gave it a hoot of starting fluid, I hit the jump pack, and it started. Then we put a carburetor and all the other stuff on it, and it hasn't started since. So given it's done that a couple of times, I'm wondering if there isn't a compression release that the spring maybe is broken on. So sometimes the compression release permanently engages, so that it right, and it won't run like that, right? It should engage, release the compression, you get the momentum of pulling it over, right? It disengages, it lets the engine, now you got momentum, it carries you through the compression stroke, and you fire on that. So I'm not sure if it's something like that, or if there's something weird going on with the valves that occasionally they open and close, occasionally they don't. I think I did a compression test on it, and the compression came out kind of high. Sometimes you see that if one of the valves is sticking. I'm not quite sure how it could stick, given the, you know, occasionally stick. I'm not sure, but I'm suspicious of the valves on that thing, I guess is what I'm telling you. Because the couple of times it started up, it ran, it didn't smoke excessively. I mean, it didn't run that long, but you know, for the few seconds it ran, it actually sounded pretty good. That's the only one I have failed on so far. Everything else in my brief career that hasn't started, and I managed to get back to it and talk it into starting. That one, you know, it literally gave me that one's the only one fighting me so far. Anyway, I guess I've done enough talking. I really want to thank everybody for dropping by to watch and comment and subscribe. Please remember to keep your feet down, your heads up, and get out and enjoy each and every day. Bye now.